You're watching Ubuntudunia TV. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more.
So just to give context, I'm with Alan Dowson and Gail Bradbrook. And Alan, I discovered recently, has a story around Christmas Island and some participation with atomic tests there, and something around the injustice, I suppose, of the treatment of the servicemen there and the broader context. And I thought it would be nice to, being a local resident and feeling this is an important story to hold on to and have available, if that felt right. It'd be nice to record this story. I know you've had like an article in the Telegraph. So this is just
Daily Telegraph, national.
Yeah, the Daily Telegraph. Which, so this is just another way of capturing the story. So really, I'd like to perhaps start by hearing what that story was from when you arrived on Christmas Island, why you were there, and what happened.
Well, I am concerned that we're not as democratic as we think we are. We condemn Russia for what it's been doing and holding back on journalists, etc. But here in Peterborough, there is a degree of censorship. For example, I've been mayor now for almost a year, and I served on Christmas Island in 1959, and what I saw on the island and information being given to the public, there is certain censorship, even in Peterborough. For example, you think the local paper, the Telegraph, would carry an article that the mayor of the city gets a medal 61 years after he earned the medal, i.e. The government this year have actually recognised the contribution we made at that time. And why 61 years? Because part of the story is the Ministry of Defence don't want it to be disclosed. How have they treated 22,000 servicemen since 1959? And the censorship not only extends to the local newspaper, which won't print any articles I've given them, in that the Telegraph, National Telegraph, actually spent a lot of time preparing an article for their Sunday edition last month, and about 4 pages and 5 photographs, and yet right at the last moment it was pulled. So people are not aware of what actually went on, and they weren't even going to include the main point that out of the 22,000 soldiers, airmen and seamen who had medical examinations, they weren't going to include any mention that the medicals we had reports have been deliberately destroyed by the Ministry of Defence, and out of 22,000 of us, there's 1,500 possibly still alive. Now, many of them may have died of old age, but a lot of them have died through radiation, and a lot of us, including myself, we have no children, and they have not printed anything about that. Now, compare that. It is defence, a Ministry of Defence. Is it the norm? No, it's not the norm. The Australian servicemen, New Zealand servicemen, the French and American, and even the Fijians servicemen have been recognised that what they were doing in the 50s and 60s was dangerous, and that those people should be recognised and were compensated for the ill health. So I am concerned because we thought we were making a contribution at 18 and 19 to the defence of the country, and we were treated pretty badly.
So what actually happened on Easter Island?
I was on the island for 10 months, living in a tent, no pub, and we watched 2 atomic bombs go off and 2 hydrogen bombs. And I forget the megaton, but there were powerful blasts at the megaton bomb, and they weren't necessary. The improvement on the trigger mechanism, I should say, improvement on the trigger mechanism for the bomb to enhance its pressure and explosion. And the Americans had already done that work, but they wouldn't share it with us because Burgess and McLean, 2 British spies, had given the Russians information. So the Americans said, no, we're not sharing information with you at the present moment. So we did these explosions, and totally unnecessary. There is other material which I can't disclose because I'm sure I get all up by it. But the basic thing is that the medical records were deliberately destroyed, and the men and their wives saying, why can't we have children?
And how did it impact you emotionally at the time?
You're young. You know, life is, after the second hydrogen bomb, you all get up and say, great, we're coming home. But we don't recognise that we were sat on the beach watching hydrogen bombs go off in our shirt sleeves. And all they said to us is, turn your back. And we turned our back, and when the bomb exploded, you then realise all your bones in your hands, you can see them. It's like an X-ray machine. And then it makes you a little bit aware that, you know, you're doing something maybe slightly dangerous. But then the 60s come and you forget that. But then you get married and no children come along and you're a bit so you ask your doctor and they ask the Minister of Defence for materials on revolt, and they're told, no, you can't have them. And then they are destroyed. And then later on, you're in your 80s, your partner has died, and you're sat in the local cafe by yourself, and other people have got grandchildren running around. Yeah. So it was a stage in life which I would have preferred not to have experienced, and I think that the British government dealing with servicemen, it was wrong. It's still wrong.
And how much evidence did you have that the infertility implications were
I've got all the
widespread
medical reports.
for other people as well?
A short an article, I think it appeared in one of the papers recently, about 2 months ago, in the Mirror, about the Ministry of Defence, the attitude towards servicemen. It was only a brief article. I didn't participate in that, but I think now, once we get our medals, when we get the medals, how many of us will still be around? I think the biggest fear is compensation, that like the post office agency, the people actually went to prison and were accused of diddling at the post office, and the government refused for 2 or 3 years to rectify the wrongness of that. And I think the government doesn't really want the spotlight on this. And compensation for when you're 80 to 85, you're a bit late in life to enjoy it and go on cruises, etc., or share it with your family members. So I think it's a deliberate policy of the government to let the last of the few go without any recognition.
And what we talk about in Peace Lotus Day is just peace, what it means for there to be justice done. And what would you think would be justice in this situation? Like, some of the reparation can be financial and some of it can be about apologising and acknowledging what happened, for example.
Some of the servicemen had children which were handicapped, deformed, or etc. Maybe some funding for them in their middle age, etc., or old age. Or maybe some of the servicemen who are 80 or 90, we might be able to pay for some of the social services which they denied at the present moment through government, the willingness of the government to provide a decent social system. I was, and I rose to being an acting corporal in the Air Force, but my job was in the catering trade, basically, and doing menial work, because I came from a working class background. We were just fodder, basically, and that was national servicemen. For some of them, it was great. You got out of your going as a labourer. I would have gone in steelworks up on Teesside. I was the last intake, basically, of national servicemen of the 1960. It was a good thing in one way. I got out of the town and the vocation of being a labourer and a steelwork. And after I came out of the Air Force, I became a student, a very mature student at 26, and did my first O-level. I'm unique in the way that gave me that opportunity, and I went to the local tech college and did an O-level, and 30 years later I went back to the same tech college, which was a University of Teesside, and was awarded a PhD. So I am unique, and that was a little bit of wonderment to me. I would have possibly been I possibly wouldn't be around in the environment I was brought up in, with the pollution, air pollution, etc. Teesside, unfortunately, last week it's Marks and Spencer's closed. The week before it's Debenham closed, and the week before that the bins closed. There is nothing in the town environmentally. So the people in Peterborough who feel that they've lost John Lewis, and it was a great loss. This is paradise compared to the people, what they're receiving up north. And the environment up there used to be heavily polluted, and the people didn't live past 60, 65. At 85, I feel they're fortunate with the environment. The sugar beet smell has gone now.
Yeah. It always feels like there's to us in Extinction Rebellion that there's an overlap between the extraction from people, you know, the servicemen, and the environmental impacts of war, and what happens to the environment overall. There's some way in which society and the world's being run that seems to be for the sort of benefit of a few, and that there's a sort of, you know, overlap between calls for justice in this kind of case, and calls for environmental justice, and calls for justice around, you know, equality and decent health services. They're all interlinked. And one of the things I guess I think is that in order to distract people from looking at root causes, and that there's an establishment that's extracting wealth from this country and from the planet and from across the world, there's a sort of push towards nationalist pride, and there's nothing wrong with loving your country, but there's something about it that others people. And one of the tools that's used to sort of ferment nationalist pride is to bang on about sort of the military and what servicemen have done, you know. So I feel like service people are sort of used, weaponised, and therefore it's a bit like the way we have to hang on to having a royal family. I have to admit I'm a Republican, but a lot of these institutions keep something in place. And I wonder if you see what I mean as a serviceman about how you might be being used, the reason why this story would be suppressed, the benefit of suppressing such a story for keeping this facade going that we treat our service people well. Yeah. And I suppose, you know, a follow-up question to that would be whether some of the bodies like Help for Heroes, whether you've talked to them and if they've got
They wouldn't want me to talk to them. The veterans wouldn't like me, even though I'm a veteran myself. They wouldn't listen. They are so indoctrinated by the pride, and I was in there for 20 years, etc. But you don't know, as an older person, what the establishment is. I share your views about the royal family and that. But over the last 12 months, I've been invited as a dignitary to events in Cambridgeshire, and it's the establishment which runs this. At every level, the establishment knows what it's doing, and we are in the wilderness. If you actually knew how being the mayor and being invited to the events where almost everybody in the room is an OBE, an NBE, a knighthood, etc., and you're the ordinary person, and they are the establishment, you know you're an ordinary person because you're wearing suede shoes. You know, the establishment, people of seriousness and progress in the world of commerce and the legal profession, you don't, gentlemen, don't wear suede shoes. Or at the local horse trials, Burley horse trials, the white tent, which is there for Princess Anne and her group, they come to Burley because their daughter rides a horse, and there's a group, we were invited, myself and the mayoress, and the ladies, not one of them appeared to be wearing a hat in this specific tent. Outside, the general public were ordinary people, but my mayoress, she was wearing a hat, and I think they noted that me in my suede shoes and the hair in the hat, we were not party to the normal society mix. I mean, it's a light-hearted approach, but it shows you that by and large, you'll get no support for your grouping and views from the public, you know. I go into the pub most evenings to relax, and I can't talk politics or religion, or they say that. But it's so sad that they are unaware that the government has just given, say, £8 million for picture frames. You know, so we can have a picture of Charles III when £3 million would be wonderful for the machine for children in London, the special hospital. Looking for it. We have our priorities wrong, I think. But by and large, people, you know, maybe it's not their fault. It is the media following the code of presentation. I mean, to say Boris Johnson last year went over to Arizona, spoke for an hour to a group of American estate agents and was given £150,000 by a donor of his political party. And when he came back to England, that donor paid for his wedding reception. I mean, 17,000 it cost. People don't know that, and they should be aware of it, but the media will not put that sort of news out. Medic has a lot to blame, and he's a bloody Australian as well. I remember in Peterborough Square, we were an anti-vivisection campaign about 40 years ago, and a person was dressed up as a rabbit, and he's prancing around and you know, entertaining.
Sure.
How do you think your policies will draw the attention, long-term attention, rather than just being inconvenience for groups of people? But the ordinary person in a car or in a bank or in a legal profession or horse racing, whatever it is, they see this as an inconvenience. Do you think it's driving people away or attracting support?
It's a really good question. And you know, that narrative that says this is driving people away, it's putting people off, it's what the right-wing press keeps saying.
True.
So if the right-wing press keep telling you something, you can assume with some degree of certainty that it's a piece of propaganda they want you to believe. If you look at the statistics, when the public are asked if they support direct action and civil disobedience, I think over 60% say yes. And since we were active in 2018, we've really changed the narrative on the climate and ecological crisis. I mean, we came into the frame mostly in 2019, and in that year they said there was a body that said we were the #1 influencers on the narrative globally. So we just came out of nowhere and did that. So we do believe in the power of disruption for getting stories out there, but we are about to do something called the Big One in the streets of London, which is welcoming people to protest with us, and there won't be any disruption. So we think, I think that you need a mixture of different things to come together, and we know the way the men got the vote with the Chartists, the way the women got the vote with the suffragettes, the way we got access to the land with the trespassers that happened, the way that change has happened on many different fronts, genetically modified crops, the civil rights movement, etc. They all used a mixture of movement building and sort of disruptive civil disobedience. So what the government has done is to bring forward a lot of legislation to try and stop activists, and meanwhile the media keeps telling everybody this doesn't work, this doesn't help. And so you think, well, we must be doing something right. So we obviously, you know, we don't want to disrupt ordinary people's lives very much. That's not a cool thing to do. And we find quite often when somebody's been caught in, say, traffic, and we do let the ambulances through, by the way, we have what's called a blue light policy. When people are disrupted, very often they'll sit in the car and they're a bit like, oh, here we go, but they're more than not supportive, right? And the thing that we always say, especially when there's some major flooding event or fires or you know, weather events or food shortages, you have no idea of the level of disruption that's coming, and we're trying to protect people from disruption.
Do you? Because I support the people who are suppressed by a minority right-wing government, not the Jewish people.
Sure.
But we in the Labour movement are very disappointed with what's happening within the Labour movement.
Yeah.
And many of our members are going over to the Greens.
Yeah, great. I mean, you know, my friend Jo Bird, who was Jewish herself, was expelled from the Labour Party. There's been quite a lot of Jewish people expelled, haven't there? So, as Mrs Thatcher said about Tony Blair, when she was asked, Mrs Thatcher was asked what her greatest achievement was, and she said Tony Blair, right? Yeah. So, the Labour Party, to my mind, are no longer the party of Labour. Yeah. When you don't have, when ministers aren't allowed to go and support people on strikes, right? It's a joke to call it the Labour Party. So I don't.
The people are still in the party because they believe in the party and the principles of it. And there's people who've been there 50 odd years, and they are disappointed what's happening, to say the least. People may want to, you look at the membership, we were 450,000, we're down to 280,000. And the people supported in the party Corbyn, you know, and now to actually expel him, many of us feel really disappointed that's happening. But we stick with it because we hope the tide will turn in the end.
Well, as you mentioned before, Rupert Murdoch's a big issue here, and one of the things that happens to activists is that they say you shouldn't do civil disobedience because you can use democracy as a way to make your change, and we're saying, what democracy? You know, that classic headline that says that it was the Sun what won it. You've got media moguls deciding who can be in charge of the Labour Party and who can't, and the whiff of having a socialist in the Labour Party was enough to make sure Jeremy Corbyn was thoroughly attacked. And I know you'll know that Ford report, when that came out about all the shenanigans in the Labour Party, of which Keir Starmer was heavily involved, that never saw the light of day. It hardly ever got any press coverage. So it's a stitch-up. And part of the reason why we're on the streets next weekend in April is to say that there isn't a functional democracy. So,
well, I think we're just at the point of talking about the current condition of the Labour Party and how that's influenced by media, maybe corporate power, and I think that's probably coming. Were you wanting to expand on that, or do you think?
No, I think I'd said, I did want to say one other thing about veterans organisations. There is a veterans organisation called Veterans for Peace. Do you know that organisation? It's worth looking them up because they are, some of them, for example, have taken their medals and thrown them back at Downing Street in disgust type of thing. So they're quite serious sorts of organisers around veterans justice. So I'd suggest you had a connection with them, and maybe when we've got this recording together we could share that with them. And I also, you may never want to wear it, but I did have an Extinction Rebellion badge for you if on your day out, you know, you want to wear it for fun. No offence if you don't, and there's my contact details, but that's a sure sign of a rebel. I mean, what we did find is when we were active in 2019 and the government shifted their policy around climate, of course they're saying one thing and doing another, and that's how it is. People like Molly Scott Cato in the Green Party, was an MEP at the time, said it made her work so much easier. So it's what we are trying to do is open space for politicians who are in the sort of mainstream.
I've got a few green connections because I used to work at Woodland Trust,
nice.
And I sort of retired from a job with them. I'm currently involved with a group called the Cambridgeshire Climate Coalition.
Cambridge and PTA to really hold the combined authority to account, really. But actually, in Peterborough, I'm part of the political group of XR in Peterborough. We meet with the council climate officer once a month, and it is actually a really, because she's really gets it. She's just got to persuade the rest of the council.
It's the classic problem. The council climate officer and her manager and and sort of his manager are all really committed to the climate agenda.
Yeah.
The problem is the highways department and the planning department. So
But it's quite good meeting with Hannah because she can point you in the direction of where lobbying or pushing
Sure.
is most likely to.
Oh, just to
to
say
have
we're
an
recording this, so if you're saying anything that shouldn't be shared,
No, that's
Okay.
that felt like
no. I think
It's
that
a
was
good
fine.
that was okay.
That I'm happy with that. Yeah.
I think anything I've just said is on the public record anyway. 'cause
And
I've
you
said
don't
it.
have to come back to seek my permission to use any of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, but so now that's stated, if anyone didn't felt uneasy about anything said, we could,
Yeah.
And to be honest, it was really about capturing testimony
Okay.
of Alan, because I talked to Alan in Palmerston several weeks ago,
Yeah.
and then when I knew that Gail was going to come to Peterborough, I just felt there's maybe something to explore around the relationship between the violence within the system and
Yeah.
how it affects people in different ways, and I think that real life testimony is powerful.
You're watching Ubuntudunia TV. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more.